What's going on, guys? It's Greg here, aka New York Prepper, and wanted to do a video about how you can avoid being ambushed after SHTF. So I think this is a big threat that a lot of preppers don't really think about when they're prepping. You know, the possibility of being ambushed is not something that a lot of preppers think about. Everybody thinks about you know, looters and stuff like that, raiders coming to their property and you know, unprepared people that are going to knock on their door and ask for supplies. But a lot of people don't think about ambushes, you know, and I think that if you're a prepper, you should be prepared to handle an ambush in case you come into a situation where you get ambushed by some type of bad people. And you know, an ambush can occur in many ways. You know, I'm not going to really go into how ambushes occur and how they're done. I'm going to do a separate video on that in my SHTF Tactics series. I'm going to do a whole video on ambushes and, you know, how ambushes are typically set up, so this way you guys can kind of understand, you know, the principles behind an ambush. Because if you understand how ambushes are done, then you can better avoid it. So I'm going to do a separate video on that in my SHTF Tactics series, which I'm going to do that soon. So look for that one. But you know, an ambush, I think if you're a prepper and you're bugging out, I think being ambushed is a high probability, especially if you don't get out right away. You know, let's say like SHTF happens and, you know, it takes you about 2 or 3 days to, you know, mobilize your family and get everybody together and move all your supplies into your truck and then, you know, head out to your bug out location. If it takes you more than like a day or two, I think that the possibility of being ambushed is going to go up tremendously, especially after 3 days. After 3 days, the probability of ambushes are extremely high, and I think that it's not just bad people, you know, like criminals and stuff like that, people, you know, bad people, but also I think the common citizen. You know, I think that people that are desperate and hungry are going to try to ambush other people to get their supplies, you know. So if you're a prepper and you're going to your bug out location, you know, let's say your bug out location is, you know, 100 miles away, and you're driving down a road, and all of a sudden you see a roadblock, and out of nowhere you see armed people coming around your vehicle, and they tell you to get out of the car, and they want all your supplies. You know, they take all your food, they take all your water, they take your ammo, your guns, and they clean it all out of your vehicle. And that's a possibility, you know, and it could be even worse than that. You know, there could be bad people that may try to kill you and shoot you, because, you know, once they take your supplies, they may be afraid that they're going to get in trouble, you know, and once rule of law returns, they don't want to be reported, so they may try to just kill you or something. But either way, you know, you want to make sure that you don't put yourself in a position where you can be easily ambushed, because, you know, once you're in that situation, it's bad and it's hard to get out of it. So the best thing to do is avoid the ambush altogether, and I'm gonna list a couple of things that I've been thinking about that can help you guys to protect yourself and protect your family and protect your prepper group after SHTF, so you guys don't fall victim to an ambush when you're moving from point A to point B. So the first thing is, the best way to prevent an ambush is to know the ambush techniques and also to avoid choke points. Any kind of terrain feature that's going to funnel you into a narrow area is an area that you want to avoid. So an example of a choke point, like a classic ambush choke point, would be if you're in the woods, if you're in a wooded area and you're walking in like a river valley or like a stream, and there's a valley on either side. You know, you have like a ravine or like a steep river valley where the sides of the river are really high. You don't want to be walking in that area with your group. You don't want to be moving through that area, because that's a very good area to set up a kill zone. And any kind of choke point where your movements can be funneled into a predictable area and where you can't get out of it easily, is where people are going to set up choke points. So like I said, a river valley with steep cliffs on either side. Once you're in that valley, there's no way for you to easily get out of it. So that's a natural choke point. It funnels your movement into the river valley because it's too steep to climb on either side. And somebody can set up on either side of the cliffs, and they can shoot down from the high ground, and they can shoot down into you guys and take you guys out. Same thing if you're in a city environment. So the classic one in the woods would be like a river valley or a stream where you have hills on either side and you're in the middle. That's for the wooded area. It may not necessarily be hills. It could also be bodies of water. If there's like a pond on one side of, let's say you're walking down a trail or something, or like a roadway, and there's a big pond on one side. That pond is going to stop you from being able to easily escape, because you'd have to jump into the water and swim, and obviously they can shoot you while you're swimming. So that creates a kill zone, so somebody can use that to their advantage to take you out. So avoid choke points, any kind of terrain features that are going to funnel you into a small area that you can't get out of. That's what you want to avoid. And in an urban area, a classic choke point would be like, if you're going down a street and you have big buildings on either side, those buildings are preventing you from escaping. So if you're moving down that street, somebody could set up in the buildings on either side of the street, and they can aim their, weapons down at you guys, and, they can shoot down towards you, and it's going to be hard for you to escape, because you have buildings on either side and there's no cover. Maybe there's some cars that you could get behind or something like that, or an alleyway that you can jump into. But, for the most part, if you're in an urban area, like an area where there's big buildings on either side of a street is a bad area to be. Any area that's open, if you're like in an open area and you have to move across an open area, like if you're in a city, that could be like a baseball field, a park, a big intersection, any kind of open area like that. If you're in the woods, it could be a field or something like that. You want to stay away from open areas and any kind of area where you're going to have clear shooting lanes, because then you can be ambushed from a long distance, and people can effectively shoot at you without any obstructions in their sight. So they can see you coming from a long distance, and they can shoot at you from a long distance. So you want to avoid like open areas, big highways, that you can see really far down the highway or down the road or something like that. You want to stay away from that, because that's going to create a clear shooting lane, so somebody can just shoot you from a long distance. Same thing with bridges. Bridges are a bad one. If you're crossing a bridge, or you have to walk across a bridge, that's a choke point, because if you're trying to get across the bridge, if somebody's waiting for you on the other side and they have, a bunch of guys with firearms and they're aiming at you, you're pretty much screwed. You can try to get off the way you came, but by the time you reverse and go out, you're going to lose a few guys, so bridges are another area you want to avoid. So we covered choke points. Avoid the choke points. Avoid open areas with clear shooting lanes. Avoid any kind of heavily traveled areas too. The more heavily traveled the area is, the more likely that somebody's going to try to set up an ambush there. And then you also want to avoid curvy roads, because when there's a curve in a road, or a trail or something like that, or whatever kind of like it could be a train track, you want to avoid curvy roads, because somebody could be setting up on the other side of the curve and you can't see what's on the other side. So once you cross around the curve, there could be somebody waiting there for you, and they can open fire on you or something. So and as time goes on, as SHTF goes on further, and the SHTF gets longer, people are going to do crazy things. They may not even try to reason with you. They may just shoot you and take all your supplies and leave you dead. They don't care. So the next one is psychology. Understand the psychology of the ambusher. Ambushers are typically going to set up in areas where they're going to get the most bang for the buck and where they're going to encounter other survivors. So that's what I was saying, like avoid heavily traveled areas. So nobody's going to set up an ambush on some kind of backwoods logging road where nobody goes, because it just doesn't make any sense. So like typically what I would think that a lot of ambushes are going to occur is like main highways, main roads, especially if it's a rural area and you have like one main road that goes in and out of town or in and out of a neighborhood. Let's say you live in like a development and there's only like one way in and one way out. That road is most likely going to have an ambush, especially if you have a big development and there's a couple hundred houses there. Somebody may try to set up an ambush, outside of your development, so when people are coming and going, for them, if you're the ambusher, you don't have to really wait that long for somebody to come by, versus like if you're in the middle of nowhere and you're on like a backwoods hiking trail, nobody's going to try to ambush you there, because they're just not going to get the most bang for the buck. They're going to go after more heavily traveled areas, the ambushers, because they want to get those resources quickly. So avoid heavily traveled areas. And the next one is you can send out scouts ahead of your main formation. So let's say like you have a group and you guys are trying to move from point A to point B. You have like, let's say 5 or 10 people, and you guys are moving through an area and you need to get to a different area for whatever reason. What you want to do is you want to send some scouts ahead of your main formation. So maybe you send out like 2 or 3 guys, and they're maybe 1 mile ahead of you, and ahead of the main group. And the scouts are going to basically look for any kind of signs of an ambush or enemy activity, any possible bad guys that are in the area, and then obviously if there is an ambush and the ambushers open fire on your scouts, at least if they do take out your scouts, it's better that they take out 2 or 3 scouts than 10 people, and they wipe out your whole formation and they take everybody out. So send out some scouts ahead of your main group, and this way they can scout out the area ahead and they can look for any kinds of signs of an ambush, or they can kind of gather information about the route ahead of the main formation. So number 3 is sending out scouts. And then number 4 is to avoid enfilading your group. So I did a video on this a couple weeks ago about the tactics video. I did it on Enfilade and Defilade. I'm not going to really spend too much time explaining it, but Enfilade is basically the worst thing you want to be in. If you're the one that's going to be ambushed, you don't want to be enfiladed, you want to be defilated. And if you're the ambusher and you're trying to ambush someone else, you want them to be in an enfiladed position. So what an enfiladed position means is that if, let's say, you're walking down a road with your group and there's like 10 of you guys, and you guys are marching in like a big group, and you guys are in like more of like a column formation where everybody's like walking, single file, and there's one person behind another. If you're walking down that road, all it would take is probably 1 or 2 guys to take everybody out, because all they would have to do is come out onto the road and shoot straight through your group, and they're going to mow everybody down because everybody's in a straight line. And because everyone's in a straight line, they can just shoot down the length of your group, down the length of your formation, and they're gonna cut everybody down with their fire. So avoid enfilading your group. The best thing is to move in a wedge formation. A wedge formation is basically, it's hard to explain it, without drawing it out, but it looks like a wedge. You kind of spread your group out. It's not like a straight line, or it's kind of spread out into a wedge, like a V almost, or a reverse V, like an upside down V. So it spreads you guys out, and it's much harder for somebody to, wipe everybody out, at one time, because you're going to have everybody spread out. So as soon as somebody shoots at one of you guys, everybody else is going to take cover, and they're going to return fire onto the person that's being ambushed. And because you guys are spread apart, it's not going to be as easy for them to concentrate all their fire into one area and wipe everybody out, at one quick shot, So spread yourselves out when you're marching. When you're moving through an area, don't, just walk in like a straight line, like a single file column. Don't bunch up together. Spread yourselves out, and you're going to make it harder for somebody to take everybody out, because as soon as somebody, starts taking fire, then everybody else can break away and take cover and return fire. So I'll do another video on the wedge formation, but if you want to look it up, just look up the wedge formation. That's the best one for you guys to use, and it'll avoid being enfilading yourself. The fifth tip that I have is, use intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance to determine possible locations of hostile forces. So, if you have to do a big movement, let's say you're going to move your family or your prepper group, your survival group, and you guys are going to move, a long distance, and you have a lot of people to move, you're going to want to plan that out. It's not just something you're going to do at the spur of the moment. You want to plan it out properly. And the best thing to do is to gather intelligence, do some surveillance, and do some reconnaissance. This way you can kind of understand where the hostile forces are. If there's like marauders or groups of bad guys, you can send out, a reconnaissance team before you guys do your movement. And it's kind of like the scouts, the reconnaissance team will go out ahead of the main group, and they may go out like a day before. Let's say you guys are going to move in 2 days from now. You send your recon guys out, tomorrow, and they're going to recon everything ahead of the main group, and they can report back with any data or any information that they have that's useful. So, they're going to, let's say, you want to have them go on the same route that you guys plan, and have the recon guys go on the route, before you guys go. And this way they can scout it out and see what's over there. They can, if they encounter any enemy groups, they can report back to you guys with radio communications if you have them, and they can, tell you guys, okay, we know that we saw a bunch of guys over here, they have a camp or something like that, or we encountered enemy fire in this location, we were ambushed over here. This way your main formation knows not to go there, and they know which areas to avoid. If you don't send out a reconnaissance group ahead of your main group, then it's pretty much like you're going blind. You don't know where anything is. And same thing if you don't have any intelligence, and intelligence can come from different sources. After SHTF, you're not going to have access to a lot of the resources you have now, but you can still gather intelligence. You can speak to other survival groups in the area, and you can talk with them and ask them what kind of information they have about this particular area, and ask them if they ever encountered any hostile forces there, or what the terrain is like. That's another thing that reconnaissance will do, is it will help figure out where the choke points are. So this way your group will avoid those choke points, and by sending out the reconnaissance team ahead of the main movement, the main group, the reconnaissance team can report back with any terrain features that might be potential locations where ambushers could set up, and this way you guys can avoid that. So send out a reconnaissance team ahead of time, a small group, maybe 5 guys max, maybe just 2 or 3 guys if you have that many, and have them scout out the route, have them go on the same route that you guys are going to go on, and have them report back with what type of terrain it's like, if there's any choke points, what kind of hostile activity they noticed, if they noticed anything weird, things like that, so intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. That's another way that you can protect yourself from being ambushed. Another one is move during low light or nighttime or any kind of poor visibility or bad weather. So obviously moving during nighttime and low light, that's pretty obvious. It's hard for you to be ambushed at night because people aren't going to see you. So unless they have night vision goggles or thermals, they're not going to be able to pull off an ambush as easily at night as they will during the day. Another thing too is that if you move during bad weather, like a blizzard or fog or a hurricane or a bad thunderstorm or a bad rainstorm or something like that, most bad guys are not going to set up ambushes in the middle of bad weather because they're going to be hunkering down themselves, especially if it's extremely cold weather and it's a blizzard. They're not going to be out there ambushing people. They're going to wait for a nice bright day when they can ambush you. So but also the fog or the blizzard or the heavy rain, it's going to reduce visibility and it's going to help conceal you guys, and it's also going to help to reduce the sight distance. So if it's foggy or if there's a blizzard and there's heavy snow, you're pretty much, the people that are ambushing you, they're going to have to wait for you to get really close, and that makes it a lot more difficult for them. So and it's also easier for you guys to retreat, and they're going to lose visibility. So let's say somebody has an ambush set up and you walk into the ambush. If it's a heavy blizzard and you have a quarter-mile visibility or less, they start shooting at you. You can just, as soon as you guys start retreating and you disappear into the woods or something, or out away from the kill zone, the snowfall is going to obscure their vision and they're not going to know where you are. So, moving during low visibility is the best time. Fog, snow, bad weather, it'll make it easier for you guys also to retreat to cover. If there's bad weather and there's bad visibility, you can find cover, and better concealment just from the weather will conceal your movements. And it'll also make it harder for the ambushers to get a clear shooting lane with a nice, open sight distance where they can see you guys coming from 300 yards away and they can prepare themselves. So, moving during bad weather or at nighttime is the best thing to do. And then another thing is to use concealment when you're moving. Don't just move out in the open. Don't make your movements obvious. Going back to the psychology aspect of it, don't just move like the way somebody would expect you to move. Move in bad areas, bad terrain, move through dense vegetation, because that's where somebody, if they're ambushing you, they're going to expect you to go that way. So if you use concealment, it's going to obviously make it harder for you to be seen. So if you're in the woods, move through more dense vegetation, avoid open hardwood forests where you can be seen from a long distance away. If you're in the city, avoid main roads and streets. Try to move through alleyways and alley corridors, backyards, or you can even move through the buildings themselves if the streets are too risky. So you don't want to just be walking in the middle of the open street. Everybody's going to see you and you're just going to be asking for it. So if you're in a city environment, you want to try to move through alleyways, move through backyards, try to go through the buildings themselves rather than going out onto the street. And always keep cover nearby, so in case they somebody does open fire on you, you can jump to cover right away. Another thing too is to invest in thermals or night vision goggles. That will help you guys to spot, an ambusher ahead of time. Thermal is very hard to hide from thermal. Night vision is also very useful to have as well. So, use thermals and night vision. Even if you just have one person with a thermal or a night vision, they can scan a whole area before you guys move into it. And then he can scan a little bit more and then move again and just keep repeating, scan an area with the thermal, and then if you see that there's no heat signatures, you can move carefully through cover and through concealment, and then keep doing that, Next one is to split up your formation. So if you guys are moving in like a big group, if let's say you have like 10 people, 20 people, don't just all move together, have separate formations, have one group, like let's say you have a group of 20 people, have like the first group of 10 and maybe have them go like half a mile or quarter mile ahead of you of a different group, So if you split up the groups, it reduces the risk of everybody being taken out by an ambush or everybody being, overwhelmed, because you're going to split up the group. So let's say the first group, they run into an ambush, the group behind can react and counterattack and back them up, so split up your group, don't just all march together. I think I already said this before, send out a recon team to go through the route first and then relay back information so to let you guys know that the route is clear. Use code words on the radios or use radio silence. So if you guys have like two-way radios and you're using that to communicate with your scouts or your recon team or your first formation, use code words, so this way if somebody's setting up an ambush, they're not going to be able to hear the specifics of anything. They'll hear that somebody's on the radio if they're listening in, if they have a ham radio or something, or they're listening into the radio waves. If you use code words, it's going to be a lot harder for them to understand like specifics of what your route is and where you're going, what your current position is, things like that. So use code words or maintain radio silence. Another thing is camouflage and stealth. So make sure you guys use good camouflage, and even if you have to use ghillie suits, it's better to build a nice ghillie suit and make sure that you're concealed well than it is to get shot, or have yourself be ambushed and have all your supplies taken. So invest in some good camouflage and practice too. You can play some camouflage games. If you have like friends of yours, you guys can try to find each other, try to wear your camouflage and then see if somebody can see you. And that's a good exercise because it'll teach you how to hide with your camouflage and how to use it effectively and how to use the terrain and the vegetation to your advantage to hide. And you'll learn about what type of vegetation works well and what doesn't for your particular area, and then so you'll gain a little more intimate knowledge with how to conceal yourself in your particular area of operations. But also the person that's your friend that's trying to observe you, it'll teach them some observation skills, and it'll be a good exercise on how to spot somebody who's concealed, which will help prevent an ambush too, because a lot of ambushers are going to be concealed. They're not just going to be standing in the open. So you need to learn how to spot people that are camouflaged as well. So so camouflage and stealth are another way that you can prevent yourself from being ambushed. Make sure you have good camouflage and good stealth. When you're walking through an area, don't be loud. Be quiet. minimize your light use. If it's nighttime, don't use like bright white lights, which can be seen from like a mile away. Don't smoke cigarettes. If there's somebody in your group that's really loud and annoying, tell them to be quiet. You have to be quiet and you have to be stealthy. That's critical. This way you don't alert yourself to anybody in the area. And camouflage is obviously very important. So, and finally is information control. Don't give out the specifics of the route that you plan to take to anybody before you actually go and move. Don't divulge plans to people unless they absolutely need to know it. Like if you have a compass man or a navigator, and even then don't tell them the plan until like right before you plan to move. And so what this will do is, if we're talking a long-term SHTF situation, you never know the people in your group. You don't know if you can trust everybody. There may be infiltrators in your group who are in contact with other survival groups or other raiders or marauders. And if you give out the details of your plans and how you're going to be moving, because remember this is about moving from point A to point B. So if you guys are going to do a big movement, for whatever reason, keep that information secret, your plans. Don't let people know what your plans are. If you have bug out plans, how you're going to bug out, don't tell all your friends, don't tell all your family members. Just tell the people that really only need to know. Don't just tell everybody what your plans are, how you're going to do it, what your route is, what your route looks like, specific roads that you're going to go on, or specific areas you're going to move through. Don't tell people that. Keep that secret. Don't tell anybody unless they absolutely need to know. So the only person that would really need to know, in my opinion, is your navigator, somebody who's going to be navigating. And if you're the person who's navigating, then you don't have to really worry about that. So really only you should know what the plan is. And you may have to even keep your wife and your kids in the dark, just because it may introduce potential risks. So but if you're dealing with other people that are not, you don't know what their loyalty is to you, and they may tell somebody. If let's say you plan to do a big movement in a week, and you tell everybody that in your prepper group that you guys are gonna go on this road and you're gonna go through this area, and this is exactly where you're gonna go. There might be somebody in that group who doesn't like you or never really liked you, and they may go take those plans that you just told them, and they may go to a group of bad guys or some other, tell them, and they may say, hey, listen, I figured out, this group over here, they're going to be moving through this area, and I think it's a good opportunity for you guys to ambush them and get some resources. You can steal all their food and water, all their guns. They have a lot of guns, they have a lot of ammo. So I can tell you this information if you pay me something for it. Give me $10,000, or give me some supplies, and I'll tell you this information, and you guys can go and ambush them. So keep your information under control. Don't tell people your plans, any specifics, dates, times, locations, none of that. Don't tell anybody that. So that's pretty much it for this video. So I'll just quickly sum it up. It's a long video, I know, but I think it's an important topic. So the first thing we covered was, avoiding choke points. The second thing was psychology. Avoid areas that are heavily traveled, because that's most likely where people are going to set up ambushes. They're not going to set up an ambush in an area where there's nobody moving through. Then we talked about scouts and sending scouts ahead of your main formation. So you should always have scouts going ahead of your main formation to scout out the area ahead. Avoid enfilading your group, move in a wedge formation. So like I said, enfilading is just, moving in a bunched up, huddled up together when you guys are walking. Don't bunch yourselves up, because somebody can just take all you guys out. Use intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance to determine possible locations of bad guys, and then use reconnaissance teams to scout out the terrain and scout out any potential locations of hostile forces, you know, which could be marauders or, you know, whatever other prepper groups. But the reconnaissance team is also going to identify terrain features that are going to have good ambush areas, so this way you guys can avoid those terrain features that are going to create choke points. The next thing we talked about was moving during low light or nighttime, or during poor visibility and bad weather. So obviously if you move when there's snow or fog or heavy rain, it's going to be a lot harder for somebody to see you coming if there's an ambush set up for you. And it's also going to be easier for you to retreat and get to cover, because your visibility is going to be obscured by the snow or the fog. And it's going to be harder for the ambushers to actually get a good sight picture and sight distance. And the next thing we talked about was using concealment. If you're in a wooded area, move through dense vegetation. If you're in the city, avoid main roads and streets. Move through alleyways, backyards, or through the buildings themselves, and always keep cover nearby. Use thermals and night vision goggles to scout out an area, because it's going to be hard for somebody to hide from a thermal. Use camouflage and stealth. You know, don't just, you know, be loud, and, you know, move quietly and stealthily. Use camouflage to hide yourself. Split up your formations, so, you know, this way if there is an ambush, it's not going to take out everybody, especially if you have a big group. If it's like 10 or 20 people, if there is an ambush, if you guys are split apart by a couple hundred yards, you know, they're not going to take out everybody. They're going to, if there's an ambush. Next thing would be to use code words or maintain radio silence on the radio, so this way if people are listening in on the radio, they're not going to hear any specifics of where you are. So make sure you use code words. And finally was information control. Don't give out the specifics of the route to anybody before you move. Only divulge your plans to people who absolutely need to know. And even then, don't tell them until right before you move. And I think that's it. And you know, so that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know it's a little bit long, but it's a lot of information here that I wanted to cover, and you know, I hope that you guys learned something from this. You know, feel free to rewind back if you missed some things and you want to re-watch it so you can get it back into your head. But you know, that's pretty much it for this video. Thanks for watching, and remember the 3 P's: prepare, practice, and persevere. You prepare by buying food and water and ammo and gear, and then you practice with your gear. And by preparing and practicing, it can help you to persevere in an SHTF situation. And remember too that SHTF is also a mental game. It's not just about what kind of preparedness you have and what kind of practicing you've done. You have to mentally overcome any challenges that you face, and it's also a mental test. So remember, prepare, practice, and persevere, the 3 P's. Alright guys, take care, God bless.